Hello cloggers and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is all about elastic load balancers and TLS SSL termination. So let's get started. Now when using an elastic load balancer, you have a choice to either terminate TLS SSL connections either on the load balancer or on your EC2 instances. And when we terminate on the load balancer, this means that your elastic load balancer decrypts the encrypted request and sends it on to your application servers as plain text over the local private network inside your VPC. So let's have a look at an example architecture. So on the left-hand side, we have our users, and they are sending an HTTPS request to an application load balancer within your VPC. And the application load balancer inspects the HTTP headers and routes the request to the most appropriate EC2 instance. And in this example, we are terminating TLS SSL on the application load balancer. So when the application load balancer receives the request, it's going to decrypt that request, inspect the HTTP header, and then send the network request on its way. So all of the certificate management and the decryption processing are happening on the load balancer. So this offloads the decryption overhead, and it means your EC2 instances will have more resources to dedicate to application processing, which could actually be more cost effective because you're wasting less compute power, so you can get away with smaller EC2 instances to handle your application load. And in addition to that, it also reduces administrative overhead if you have many EC2 instances, because it means that you'll be managing the X509 certificates, which are used to encrypt and decrypt. They will all be managed on the load balancers instead of managing them individually on multiple EC2 instances. However, there is a security implication that we need to be aware of when we're considering where to terminate our TLS requests. And when we terminate TLS requests on the load balancer, it means that the traffic between the load balancer and your EC2 instances is going unencrypted. And this may be perfectly acceptable for your application. After all, this is all within your own VPC, right? No one else is listening. And AWS do state that network traffic cannot be listened to by instances that are not part of the connection, even if they are running within your own AWS account. However, you may have compliance or regulatory requirements to use end-to-end encryption all the way down to your EC2 instances. And in that scenario, you would need to terminate your TLS SSL on the EC2 instances themselves. So let's take a look at which load balancer to use in both of these scenarios. So which load balancer should you use? Well, the application load balancer is the most cost effective. However, it only supports terminating TLS SSL on the load balancer itself. And of course, it only supports HTTP and HTTPS. So if you do have a requirement to terminate SSL on your EC2 instance, then you are going to need to use either the network load balancer or a classic load balancer and specify the TCP protocol rather than HTTP. So you will be load balancing at the TCP level. And the load balancer will simply forward the request to your targets rather than decrypting and examining HTTP headers. And the classic load balancer, of course, that is still an option, but it is the legacy option. And they no longer recommend that you use the classic load balancer, but do be aware that it can still come up on the exam, and you may well see it as an option, as an alternative to the application load balancer. So it's just worth noting that if you do have the requirement to terminate SSL on your EC2 instance, you can also use the classic load balancer as well as the network load balancer. So moving on to some of our exam tips. For best use of your EC2 compute resources, then terminate TLS SSL on the elastic load balancer. However, if there is a requirement to ensure that traffic is encrypted all the way to the EC2 instance, then terminate TLS SSL on the EC2 instance instead of on the load balancer. And if you do need to terminate traffic on the EC2 instance,
then you're going to need to use a network or classic load balancer and load balance using the TCP protocol. And remember that the application load balancer, it only load balances at the HTTP, HTTPS level only. And for any other protocol, including TCP or any other protocol that's not HTTP, HTTPS, then you must use either the network load balancer or the classic load balancer. So that is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.